On Wednesday, 24th of November, 27 migrants died after their small boat capsized in the English Channel, while they tried to make the 21-mile crossing from France to England. In the UK at least, this has sparked a national debate, and this isn't a new thing either, with this seemingly coming up as an annual trend, whereby the topic of migrants crossing the Channel resurfaces and captures the nation's attention. In fact, and note how beautiful this segue is, our book, Brexit the Colouring Book, discusses how this exact same issue arose in the summer of 2020 as well. By the way, if you want a copy of the book, then the store is linked below, and if you want one as a Christmas gift for a friend, then you can get one for yourself and one for them for just $14.99. That's a big discount. Anyway, thanks for supporting the channel, and back to the topic at hand. When it comes to how we ought to deal with asylum seekers, there are those on the right suggesting that we need to deter dangerous crossings by either making it harder to cross or making the UK asylum process less appealing, and those on the left instead recommending that we provide a safe route between France and the UK to prevent future humanitarian disasters. Now, in theory, both sides have half a point here. Expected harm, in crude language the number of migrants you expect to die or be harmed while crossing from France to the UK, is a function of both the risk for those crossing and the number of migrants trying to cross. If both the risk and number were large, i.e. if migrants were trying to cross by very dangerous means, like say in a paddling pool with road signs as oars, then you'd expect a lot of harm. Or, on the other hand, if both risk and numbers were low, i.e. few migrants were making the crossing, and only by relatively safe means, like hitching rides on ferries, then you basically expect no harm, no drownings, and no capsizing. The right focus on decreasing this number by deterring migrants, either by making crossing even more dangerous, or making life as an asylum seeker even more miserable. The left focus on decreasing the risk by making crossings easier, even if that also means increasing the total number of migrants. Both claim that their policy is the most humanitarian. So in this video, using the risk number framework, we're going to evaluate 4 policies that have popped up in the UK's national discourse. In order of decreasing severity, they are offshore processing facilities, turnbacks, increasing security at French borders, and humanitarian visas. So let's start with offshore processing facilities. Essentially, the idea here is to escort boats to an asylum processing facility somewhere outside of the UK. Australia currently does this. They've got a camp on the tiny island state of Nauru, where migrants can either claim asylum in Nauru or return to their own country. There's no way for them to get into Australia. In 2020, Priti Patel floated the idea of using Asylum Island, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic, and more recently there were reports that the government was planning on opening an offshore processing centre in Albania, but those were quickly dismissed by Albania's Europe minister as embarrassing and fake news. Proponents of this policy claim that it will both deter migrants, therefore decreasing the risk of humanitarian crises in the Channel, and mean less migrants into the UK. Unfortunately, this just isn't supported by the evidence. Australia, who implemented this policy in 2013, have quietly admitted that it's been a failure, which is why in October, Australia closed its infamous processing centre on Papua New Guinea's Manus Island. That's because the policy failed to substantially decrease the number of migrants, was declared illegal by Papua New Guinea's Supreme Court in 2016 for human rights abuses, and costs an inordinate amount of money. Running the Manus camp cost literally billions of dollars, in part because Australia was forced to pay $70 million to those who had been unlawfully detained after the Supreme Court ruling, and the remaining camp in Nauru still costs Australia $40 million a month, which, given that there are just 107 migrants in Nauru today, comes to an astounding $4.3 million per migrant per year. Yep, $4.3 million per migrant per year. Any UK equivalent would probably be even more expensive, because, as the Albania case showed, the UK doesn't have a Nauru-esque island neighbour happy to take migrants for cash, and it would take years to start up even if they did. It would also increase the crossing risk, because it would force migrants who didn't want to go through the official means to take even more extreme risks to avoid detection, like crossing the channel in the dark or on smaller boats. So if that won't necessarily be successful, then the second policy is turnbacks. Turnbacks are exactly what they sound like. They essentially involve intercepting boats and turning them away. This is another Australian policy, although it was perhaps most famously used by the Clinton administrations in the mid-90s, when the US Coast Guard created a floating Berlin Wall of boats around Haiti. Again, this is something the UK government were apparently considering back in October last year. Now, while turnbacks can work, creating another Berlin Wall of boats in the world's busiest shipping lane is probably not a great idea. Turnbacks also generally work best when the turnback involves forcing boats into international waters. At the narrowest point in the channel, however, there's a direct territorial sea border between France and the UK. And that means that in practice, turnbacks would involve pushing migrant boats into France, which, according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, would require France's consent. And so far, the French have been pretty explicit that they're not interested. It's also possibly a violation of the 1951 UN Convention, regulating the status of refugees, which obliges all signatories to take in genuine refugees in their territory, where a refugee is defined as someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear. Contrary to Priti Patel's claims that 70% of migrants are not genuine refugees but economic migrants, most channel crossing migrants are eventually offered protection in the UK. According to Home Office data, 59% of asylum claims filed between 2017 and 2019 were ultimately successful. This figure is even higher when it comes to channel migrants, because the nationalities among channel migrants, like Iranian, Syrian, Afghan and Yemeni, have a higher than average likelihood of being successful. Essentially, turning back channel boats, which most likely contain genuine refugees, might contravene international law. Now, interestingly, this might have been legal while the UK was still in the EU. The Dublin Accord says that refugees have to claim asylum in the first country they arrive in, which provided legal grounds for the UK to return migrants back to France. But Johnson failed to negotiate its inclusion in the Brexit deal, and even if he had, the Dublin Accord is often ignored. In 2013, for example, EU countries made 76,359 transfer requests, but just 15,938, or 20%, were actually carried out. All in all, while turnbacks might work, they probably violate international law, and especially while France is refusing to agree to them. Turnbacks also increase risk, because migrants again have to take dangerous measures to avoid detection, and are more likely to capsize in the process of being turned around. The third policy is increasing security on the French side, and the UK has already committed to sending the French government £54 million for precisely this reason. In theory, while this might increase the risk of crossings, it should decrease the number of migrants, but in practice, it's been relatively unsuccessful. Unauthorised channel migration has been going on for at least the past 2 decades. In the 2000s, migrants from former Yugoslavia crossed via the Eurostar, until Tony Blair paid France to increase its security. Migrants then started hitching rides in trucks and lorries, which was markedly more dangerous. You might remember the 39 Vietnamese migrants who froze to death in a refrigerated lorry in Essex. But this route through trucks and lorries remained open until the UK and France introduced even more border security, including checks and heat sensors. And this forced migrants into boat crossings, which have steadily been increasing over the last 2 years. Essentially, increasing security often just increases risk by forcing migrants to use more dangerous means without decreasing the numbers, which is why net asylum numbers in the UK have stayed pretty consistent since 2004, despite the new measures being put into place. This also relies on UK-France cooperation, which doesn't look forthcoming. The final option is humanitarian visas, recently proposed by Neil Coyle MP as an amendment to the upcoming Nationality and Borders Bill. This policy essentially begins from the premise that migrants will always want to cross from France to the UK. It's not because crossing the Channel is easy or because England is overly migrant-friendly. UK migrants actually receive less money than they would in France, and are regularly subject to the possibility of indefinite detention, unlike anywhere else in Europe. Rather, it's because migrants either speak English or have family in the UK. For example, the largest group crossing the Channel are Iranians, presumably because their family members were in the UK, not France, with the UK's Iranian population being far bigger than the French one. So the logic goes that if migrants are always going to want to try and make it into the UK, you need to provide a safe, risk-free way of doing it. At the moment, if you're a migrant in France, there's basically no way you can claim asylum in the UK. The UK does have a refugee resettlement scheme, but it's pretty tiny, averaging just 5,000 resettlements a year, compared to the 20,000 or so asylum claims that are made each year. The scheme also only applies to refugees in certain countries, which means that you can't actually apply from France. The implementation of humanitarian visas would provide a means for migrants to safely cross the Channel to the UK, where they could have their asylum claim properly processed. This would obviously bring the risk down to basically zero, but it isn't popular amongst right-wingers, because it would also encourage more migrants. Now, while this might be true, it's worth noting that the UK currently takes in relatively few migrants. In 2020, the UK received about 36,000 asylum applications and accepted about 9,000. For context, France received 93,000 and accepted 19,000, while Germany received 122,000 and accepted 62,000. This means that the UK has the 19th highest asylum acceptance rate in the EU, well below its developed counterparts. And therefore, some argue that the UK has the capacity to let in more refugees, if not only for humanitarian reasons. So, those are the 4 policies that are available to the government. And as a final thing, whichever policy they end up pursuing, there are 3 things that would help regardless. Firstly, improving relations with France, whose cooperation will be required whatever happens. Secondly, properly funding the Home Office, who now have a backlog of 125,000 asylum applications, double that of what it was in 2014. Thirdly, improving data quality. The Home Office gave up estimating the UK's illegal immigrant population in 2005. It's impossible to evaluate the efficacy of these or any policies. Anyway, what do you think? Which of these policies do you think the government should go for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Finally, as I said at the start, we're running a major Christmas promotion whereby you can get 2 copies of our book for just $14.99, a major discount and a way to get a gift for yourself and for a friend. Anyway, that offer's only on for a limited time, and you'll want to order soon if you want to ensure Christmas delivery. Purchasing obviously supports the channel, but if you can't do that, you can also subscribe, which really helps us too. And a special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon.